So we're trying to minimize a certain level of cost associated with bandwidth. We also have based on the large number of employees we have a large Microsoft M365 deployment. So that amount of bandwidth that we consume and the performance of it to be able to reach the cloud is fairly significant today. So our goal is to try to break that traffic out locally, but as closer to the remote users, in order to offload the back-end systems from that. We also have several other projects that are either security-centric, that will utilize the SD-WAN infrastructure as a connecting point, or in some cases where we'll actually, for specific engineering teams who will be able to access cloud security or cloud security services, will send that traffic directly to the internet using the SD-WAN. Things it does particularly well. The core of the product itself, architecture-wise, is designed very well for scale. So for the back end, for example, the ability to support a large number of diversified locations and a flexibility in topology and how those can be deployed. Bosch has a very complex kind of a deployment where how its remote sites around the world are connected. We have well over 1,200 locations in our wholly owned operations, and those are deployed in regions, literally all around the world. So for us to be able to be flexible in how the topology of those sites are deployed was fairly significant. Certainly, absolutely. So the platform itself is very feature rich. One of the difficulties we find is that to do things, for example, in terms of monitoring, obtaining data, it's not consistent. There are multiple interfaces to get them, but you can't get the same data through all interfaces. So you end up having to try to find either the least common denominator, or we have to build our own code that then mines through all the interfaces, and that becomes very problematic. The other problem we found is that there is issues where the same amount of expected software quality isn't really there in all releases. Cisco breaks things out by like shorter or long-lived release trains, and the long-lived release trains tend to have good quality by the time you get to the second or third release within it. But then those are skips. There's like 12, 18-month skips in between those. So if you start releasing features on versions in between there, practically to be safe, you have to wait until much later. So to be able to see new feature capabilities as they come out and deploy those readily needs to improve. It needs to be much faster. I'd say between 7 and an 8, roughly about there. So if you had to give it a specific number, I would say an 8. So well suited. So it's if you look at operations that have, say, facilities or locations that have up to around 1,000 employees, or like some of our diverse manufacturing facilities that have smaller amounts of bandwidth but have high uptime requirements, the system is very flexible with regards to how fault tolerance is addressed, how redundancy is built, that allows us to accommodate those needs. It has some nice built-in security features that allow us also to be able to adapt to different conditions. The problem we struggle with at the same time, though, is that when you activate some of those other more feature-rich capabilities, the throughput of the platform begins to drop fairly significant. So if you add too many security features or too many other features onto it, you have to try to put in a bigger and bigger device in order to accommodate the same amount of throughput that you need. And what happens then is that the overall cost now becomes prohibitive, and it's no longer desirable to be deployed. There are other options are better. The other side is that when you pass a certain amount of total throughput, so if we have campuses or large locations that may have 5,000, 6,000 employees at them, the size of the device, again, that's needed to be able to do that becomes cost prohibitive to do it. So again, that benefit that we're looking for, it seems to have a sweet spot, right? That's like between 10 megabits and 1 gigabit, and we don't really seem to have a good solution in the platform to address some of the other ones. For us right now, thankfully, those level of ones are very small. We don't have that many occurrences of really high throughput requirements, but we do see that in the future growing. So we're certainly looking for options for how to address those. So we did a very stringent evaluation a few years ago. We evaluated probably about a dozen suppliers on paper that we evaluate just by capabilities, and we under some other business criteria, and we whittled that down to a list of 5. And out of those 5, we brought 4 of those into our lab environment, where we ran approximately 350 different test cases on. We really beat on it pretty heavily. And some of those other suppliers would have been companies like Fortinet, Versa Networks, Silver Peak, which is now owned by Hewlett Packard.
And how did Cisco products stack up?
So Cisco fared, what I would say, when we scored the numbers, was better than the average, but not at the very high. So there were some areas where Cisco was very high, very strong in. Other ones, not as much as a couple of the others. I think in its sweet spot, as I was saying earlier, I think it's a good value. But again, our problem is that when we start to extend beyond those numbers, is where it starts to get a little bit more cost prohibitive. So part of our concern is that as we look at a broader deployment over the next 2 to 4 years, is that if we have too many locations grow in throughput requirements beyond that, then we start to get into a problem. Overall, I'm happy with what it is, because otherwise I certainly wouldn't have recommended it for deployment. But part of that was a little bit of trust that certain features would be delivered by 12 or 14 months from when we signed the contract. So we're living on a little bit of faith. But overall, yeah, I would say I'm happy. In one context, I don't think anything lives up to sales by anybody, so that's not exclusive to Cisco. But I would say now, where we're at right now, it's probably where that marketing level was discussed with us, 2-3 years ago. So it took a lot. So it was a bumpy road to get there, but I think we're getting very close now. Would I buy this product again? Yeah, I probably would. Probably in a little bit of a different, or I would probably look at applying it to our scenario a little bit differently. But yeah, I would probably do this again. Sure.